In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. It's been a tough couple of days for the Memphis Grizzlies since we last talked to you. I think we were optimistic that they may have some wins on the horizon. Instead, two pretty tough losses to the Bulls and the Nets. We have a lot to get into. There's some injuries to talk about. I think there's been problems with the defense. I know there's a lot of questions about Taylor Jenkins and his rotations, so we will get into all of it. But Chris, first, just your initial thought on the week so far. We record this on Thursday before the Bucks game.
Well, it's, the two losses they've had since the home opener, there have been things working against them. John Morant did not play in the game against Chicago. Desmond Bane did not play, for the most part, did not play the second half in the game against Brooklyn. But it felt like even with the issues they were having, they should have been able to navigate themselves to a win in both of those games. You're up 20 points against Chicago and you blow that lead. And then with Brooklyn, it felt to me the first half against Brooklyn was more distressing. Maybe it's too strong of a word, but more bothersome. Maybe that's a better word than the second half. They didn't pull it out in the second half, but the first half to me felt particularly unserious. Most of their turnovers came in the first half. I think they had 15 turnovers in the first half of that game and just didn't seem focused, which is particularly, bothersome because Brooklyn was on the second night of a back-to-back and the Grizzlies had a practice the day before to try to get themselves refocused. So that's been a rough two games. There's sort of a lot of different things happening at the same time. I mean, you have a lot of injuries starting to pile up and piling up even more now after the Brooklyn game with Desmond Bane and Marcus Smart added to the list. That's one thing. You have what seem to be unspoken minutes limits on players who are available in Jaren Jackson and John Morant. And then you also have this sort of strategic desire to play a deep rotation with like quick subs and all of that. And those are three separate things, but they're all sort of coming together to really foul up, the lineups you're putting on the floor, and I think the ability to win some of these games.
I think the defense has probably been the number one problem so far in terms of on-the-court issues. And I've asked Taylor Jenkins about this several times now, including practice on Tuesday and then after the game yesterday. He seems to think that most of this, and this was validated by a few of the Grizzlies players in the locker room after the loss of the Nets, that a lot of this is like point of attack defense that's really crushing them, like guards, opponent guards, and really any player. They're getting to the rim too easily. They're helping. There's too many guys in the paint, and then they're easy kickouts to the corners and to the wings for wide open three-pointers. It's something that's plagued them. The Bulls really crushed them, and we were able to get back in the game doing that. To you, do you think, especially now that Marcus Smart, we'll see how long he's out, is that a serious concern going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a personnel element to that, and even more so now with Marcus Smart out. No Vince Williams is your two best perimeter defenders. I guess my big reaction to that though is that that's a what, that's not a why. And when I look at the defense stuff, to me, there's a pattern, and then I have a theory about the pattern. The pattern is that the Grizzlies, pretty much every year that Taylor Jenkins has been the head coach, the Grizzlies have been a good defense at the end of the year. In fact, every year, I think they've been an above average defense. Most of those years, a top 10 defense. Every year at the end of the season, they're one of the league's better defenses. Every year, early in the season, they're not a good defense. If you go every season, and I wrote about the 3-point defense in particular this week, but if you pull back out to just totality of the defense, I think you'll see that the first month of the season, every year, they're in the bottom 10 in defense. At the end of the year, they're in the top 10 in defense. Okay, so that's a pattern. Why does that happen? I don't know for certain, but here's my theory. See if this checks out to you. At the end of the season, they're almost always better on defense than offense. And if they're not totally better on defense than offense, they're better on defense than half-court offense, right? So they go into every summer thinking we need to fix our offense. And the coaching energy over the summer is about the coaching hires, the coaching energy. It's all about offensive philosophy, how to get better on offense. They focus on offense in training camp. They focus on offense in preseason. And then the defense has to catch up. I feel like that pattern repeats itself every year.
I think that's certainly possible. I also think that so early in the season, you're playing against teams that are going to be more fresh than they are late in the season.
Right.
Teams are going to generally be more healthy than they would be late in the season.
Right.
And I think some of it is poor luck just based on opponent 3-point percentage because even wide open.
But it happens every year, though.
I know. That's the puzzle to figure out here. I do think that there are some early season factors that may also play a role, I guess, in terms of like.
Well, no, I think what you're saying about opponents being fresher at the beginning of the year, if the Grizzlies, and more so than ever, if they're trying to take advantage of depth and pace, I do think that probably is more effective late in a season than early in a season. We were talking about this before we started recording. That has not been effective this season so far. 5 games in, the idea of like we play faster, we play more guys, we're going to wear guys down. You would think you would get better as the game goes on. The Grizzlies have gotten worse. Their first halves have been dramatically better than their second halves.
Well, one thing that I was thinking about last night, because we're only 5 games into the regular season, so yes. I don't think it's time for dramatic changes yet.
I agree.
But we did talk, you and I both discussed.
Also, they don't have enough players to make dramatic changes yet.
that too, for sure. Right. But we talked about, like, at what point, if this isn't working, what they're trying to accomplish, will they scrap it? Now, the offense hasn't been that bad.
Yeah, no, I think this is key. Taylor Jenkins said that, and he was right.
And Taylor Jenkins said that, and he was right. But he also said, I really don't think we've played bad basketball outside of the last 2 games in the second half against the Rockets.
That's half the season.
That's half the season.
Right. I thought the same thing when he said it.
That's half the season.
That's half your season so far. If you're playing bad basketball 50% of the time, that's a problem.
Right. So I immediately took note of that. I'm glad you beat me to the punchline there. Yeah. I wasn't the only one that caught that.
The thought bubble popped up in my head in the postgame press conference room the second he said that.
That's obviously not good enough, and I think there's a lot of reasons why there might be some level of concern, but I think defense is number one right now. And injuries, of course.
Yeah, no. To me, it's compounded. The injuries make everything else more of a concern because it's going to make it harder to turn it around when you don't have your players. And to me, that's the other stuff that the non-injury concerns are things that can be more quickly fixed and corrected if you have all your players. And so, to me, it's the injury stuff that makes the rest of it that much harder to get through. It is early in the season. 2-3 is like not two. Even if they lose the Milwaukee game, most people who listen to this probably the game's already happened. They may lose it. Second half of back-to-back against Milwaukee. Let's say they're 2-4. 2-4, like 6 games in the season, is not that big of a deal. And I wouldn't be concerned about it at all if not like for the injury uncertainty, right? And the idea that when are they going to get healthy? Because another way to look at this season, setting everything else aside, if you want to make the season super simple through 5 games, they have had 1 basketball game where John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. were all available from the beginning to the end of the game. They beat a really good Orlando team and just about ran them off the floor. The other 4 games where they have not had all 3 of those players available for the whole game, they're 1-3. And so to me, the math is bad if you can only have your top 3 guys available 20% of your games, and then you can only win 25% of the games where they're not all 3 available. That math does not work. And that both of those things got to change.
1 game.
1 game.
1 game.
1 out of 5, 20%.
Not near good enough.
No.
I mean, what percentage would you say if you got
and that number's going to
at this point?
That number's not going to grow for at least a little for some. Desmond Bane's already out against Milwaukee. We'll see what happens after that. As we record, we don't have injury updates beyond that he's out for this game.
Yeah, we're gonna. I would guess hear from Taylor Jenkins tonight.
Right.
Before the game, he might be able to give a little bit of information, although it is still pretty it's been a quick turnaround, so I don't know what the details of that will look like. But
I'm not expecting an official team update. Taylor Jenkins will say something, but I'm not expecting an official written team update on Desmond Bane today, Thursday, Halloween, as we speak. Or Marcus Smart.
At this point, what percentage of the Grizzlies games with the 3 stars that they could get to is good? That's a very difficult question to word, but I'm trying to navigate that.
I mean,
if they were to get to 60% of games with those 3 available,
I would
you
take
say
that.
that's
If you
good?
offer that to me, I take it. I would, I guess my hopeful number would be more like 50. If you can get 50%, if you can get, 40, 41 games this season, I think they'll still be a really good team. More than that would be great. I think, and I wrote about this earlier in the preseason. I didn't give the numbers, I gave the percentages. But if I remember correctly, I'm trying to visualize my notes, I think it was 53 is the highest game total. The year they won 56 games, I think they got 53 of all 3 players together. That'd be great, but I'd take 41, sure.
41 would be pretty good.
Yeah. It actually would be pretty good, but given the standards,
Given the
Grizzlies have
current
operated with.
situation
Right.
they're in,
Yeah.
it feels like that would be. I mean, they had Ja is off the injury report, thankfully, tonight, which is
moderately
good.
surprised he was not on the injury report at all.
Which is good, but he hasn't. He's been banged up these last couple games.
I thought he looked banged up in the Brooklyn game. In a way, he and Jaren are both seem to have minutes limits because of some soft tissue injury stuff. If I wouldn't have known, I would not have guessed there's any issue with Jaren at all. But Ja looked a little banged up to me.
We are going to have to get into the minutes stuff.
Yeah.
But before we do that, do you have anything else that has stood out to you over this last week?
I just think that all that stuff we talked about just sort of overwhelming everything. I did see some stuff, and I need to do what Josh should do and just stay off Twitter probably. But one thing I did notice some last night in their aftermath after the game, it was sort of paled in comparison to the main stuff people were mad about or talking about. There's some secondary, why is Zach Edey not finishing this game? He's 6 of 9 from the field. Zach Edey has not been playing well. And I don't say that to raise an alarm. He's a rookie who's a week into his career. But the idea that because he was 6 of 9 shooting, you need to play him down the stretch. If you're watching these games, he has not been playing well. And he's not at a spot where I think you can trust him defensively late in a tight game.
Maybe not yet. I do think he's incrementally gotten a little bit more comfortable, although it's disappointing that the hook shots haven't been going. The stuff around the basket that he did repeatedly in college.
He shot 6 of 9 in that game because he was set up at the rim repeatedly, which is good. That's what you want. Yes. That's what he's there for, to be set up at the rim, and to finish the place. And he did that pretty well. But 6 of 9 was not spectacular given the touches he got, because there were a couple of times where he should have dunked that ball instead of going up soft with it, right? And then the defense stuff, I have actually no problem really with Zach Edey at this point. I think the way they're using him is fine with me, but the call for more is that is a misread of what is happening out there. That is not the answer.
The one player that I do think should be playing more that isn't playing as much, although he did play a little bit more in the game on Wednesday night, is Brandon Clark.
If you're looking for a silver lining in the Brooklyn game, that is the best. That's the most effective Brandon Clark has been so far this season. And in the fourth quarter where they made their little run, I think they cut it maybe from the down 13 to down 5 or something like that. It was, not only was it Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson, Brandon Clark playing together, they were doing everything. I think every shot, every assist, every whatever. It was just all those 3 guys. And I think everyone thought coming into the season, okay, Zach Edey's going to start, but your go-to closing lineup is probably Brandon Clark, right? That is what they need to get to if they can. Yeah.
Yeah, given the current injuries, it's going to be interesting to decide what closing lineup that they do go to. But I do think you're best positioned. You got to have Ja out there, Jaren out there. And I like having Brandon Clark next to him simply because I think as a defender, he's a little bit more light on his feet. And he obviously has that long-term chemistry with Jaren, and that combination plays well almost every time they're on the court together.
And I think given all the wing injuries that are piling up, something they've already been doing, I think we're going to see more of, and that's Santi Aldama at the 3.
Yeah. well, you also need guys that can pass, dribble, and shoot. And
Right.
I think Santi is able to do all three of those things, and that's a critical piece because you're going to be light on those guys given all the injuries that you have, especially on the wing and in the backcourt. So it'll be interesting to see what Jenkins does tonight against the Bucks. All right, we should talk more about Jenkins, but first let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
Okay, Chris, the internet is outraged over Taylor Jenkins' rotations.
The internet is not the world, we should note, but yes.
Not the world. No, it is not.
I'm saying that not just to you or to the listener. I'm saying this to myself.
Yes.
The internet is not the world.
It is, that's hard to block out sometimes, though. Sometimes it's a challenge when, and like I certainly am sympathetic to how Ja, may feel. Seriously. I'm being dead serious.
Yeah.
Like it's tough. It can be a very toxic place at times, but they're not. I think there's a lot of questions about what Jenkins has decided to do with ramping some of these players up early in the season, and there's not really true clarity on whether he's ramping them up or not, or if this is just a tactical thing, because I think we've gotten different answers on different occasions.
I think I was listening to our buddy Keith Parrish, just listening to this pod when I was driving around this morning, and he said, I'm gonna push back at him a little bit on this to answer your question. He said, I wish, I'm not in Memphis. I wish Memphis people in Memphis media in Memphis would ask Taylor Jenkins whether there's a minutes limit on these guys or whether he's just making a strategic decision. He has not said there's a minutes limit, but he has tied the Jaren Jackson and John Morant stuff specifically to the injury issues and ramp up. So it's not the 11-man rotation is strategic. I asked him about that. I wrote about that this week. The 11-man rotation is strategic. The relatively deep, flat minutes distribution relatively is strategic. The quick substitutions is strategic. They're not playing Jaren Jackson and John Morant 28 and 29 minutes because they think that makes them better than playing those guys 35. They're doing that because of the injury health stuff. The question is, are they right about that? The question is not, is that why they're doing it or not? That is why they're doing it. But the question is, are they right about that? And I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know if I would agree.
I mean, he said this. He has not said minutes limit, but he said this is the ramp up process.
I'm a little lost here with some of these answers that he's given.
Oh no, yeah.
And to me, that's honestly where I kind of have a problem with it, because if he just said, this is what we believe in, we believe that we should play our starters less minutes than other teams in an effort to keep them healthy over the course of a whole season. There may be people that don't like that.
Yeah.
But at least they're committed to something. The position that we're in right now, I'm not sure what they're committed to. I think we need some clarity on
what
it.
I'm saying is that I think with John and Jaren specifically, the minutes totals have not just been about we're trying to keep them healthy all season. It is about they are recovering from injuries right now. Right? I don't think they intend to play for Jaren and Ja to average 28, 29 minutes all season. I think they intended for them to do that until they feel like they're in the clear.
So is that the answer you thought? Maybe I just need to go back and listen to it, and it's not fresh on my mind. But I recall you asking Taylor Jenkins, "Is this a tactical thing or is this a in the moment type of thing?"
Yeah,
and he said that this was a strategy.
Well, he said it was. He said the answer was a little bit more complicated than that. The answer I'm referring to now is subsequent to this, past this. But in that exchange, he started out by saying, we have, he allowed that there's the 6 and 9 and the injuries and all that factors, but it is more of a strategic thing. And I think what he was saying is that there are elements to what they're doing now that are related to injury and schedule and related to competition among players. And there's all these other stuff that are factor in, and that stuff may fall away over time. but they also want to try to do a deeper rotation and the tighter substitutions and all that. It's a matter of strategy. But I think he subsequently said, specifically he was asked about Jaren and Ja, and he cited the ramp up and the injury issues with them. Which again, that is an explanation. That doesn't mean they're right about that. I don't know whether there's damage that's going to accrue from Jaren Jackson playing 33 minutes against Brooklyn instead of 28. I do not know the answer to that, and I think that's an entirely legitimate question.
I took questions after the game from listeners, and obviously the timing, I knew that it would probably we would get a few. We got close to 50.
Oh my God. We're not going to be here that long.
No, we're not. I'm going to try to knock out probably 65% of these in one.
Oh, it's a lightning round.
A lot.
Okay, here we go.
A lot that have to do with Jenkins overall.
Yeah.
Thoughts about the job he's doing, his job security, those sort of things. And here's where I stand on this. This is his 6th year in the NBA, as a head coach, coaching the Grizzlies. He's had lots of successful seasons regular seasons that came up short in the playoffs. And they overhauled his assistant coaching staff over the summer, and we're 5 games into the season. So I'm not sure there's going to be any sort of rash decision made right away. I think this would have to continue to go the way it's going now, and we'll see what happens. And like they could turn it around, and this will be a thing of the past. But it feels quick. That would feel like a very quick hook.
I think what happened with the Grizzlies coaching staff over the summer, which you've written about more than anyone else, is somewhat unusual. It's not your typical, you brought in a new lead assistant situation. And I think, and this is just me, this is just my guess. This is my educated guesswork. This is not rooted in any kind of sourcing. My read of the situation relative to Taylor Jenkins' short-term job security, I'm not talking about next summer. I'm talking about like the first month of the season, the first 2 months of the season, that kind of thing. My read on what the summer coaching overhaul says about his short-term job security is a lot different than what a lot of people have read into that. To me, it does a lot of times when you brought in a new lead assistant, the coach is on the hot seat. That's what people think. Right? John Hollinger wrote that this summer. Taylor Jenkins is on the hot seat because they're changing his coaching staff. It is my read of it that the magnitude of the total coaching staff overhaul and philosophical overhaul doesn't make Taylor Jenkins more susceptible early. It makes him less, because I think it's too much to unwind because you've had a bad 2 or 3 weeks. I think the commitment to it is such that you don't like turn the page on that or take a hard left from it quickly, Do I think if the Grizzlies have a bad season, Taylor Jenkins will be back next year? I think that's a real good question. But do I think if they're 4-8, they're going to fire the head coach? A lot of times that is what would happen in this situation. But I do not believe in this situation that's what would happen at all.
Yeah, it does. They just paid a lot of guys.
Right.
There's a lot of contracts out there that are attached to Taylor Jenkins.
Right.
So, unless they were to singularly dismiss him, which doesn't seem likely.
I think you can't do what they did and have a short leash with it. I just think you can't. For better or worse, I don't think you can do that. They made this bet, right? They made this bet. And they're the ones that have to see the results of it. And you can't see the results of it in 5 games. Yeah. So you may not even see the results of it in 2 months, right? I agree.
So I do think that is...
I think I said this the last pod we did. They were 9-10 twice. They started season 9-10 and made the playoffs.
Yep. Is there anything in particular that you take issue with the coaching staff so far this season?
I would say that the early returns, and I don't know, skeptical I think is not the right word for me. I was taking a very much a wait and see approach. I'm not going to get worked up about the theory. I want to see the practice on the quote unquote new offense stuff. I think 5 games in, that stuff looks fine, looks pretty good. I don't have any, it seems like it's going to be fine, when you have your talent. I don't have an issue with that. I think the defense stuff is just going to work itself out over time if you get healthy. And so to me, that's sort of the 3 components to their approach. It's the offense, it's the defense, and it's the how you manage rotations and minutes, right? Those are the 3 things. I think the offense stuff looks good relatively. I think the defense stuff looks like not good, but something that's going to work itself out. And I think, to me, the questions are on the minutes usage stuff. And so I don't know if I believe in the impact of the deep rotation over time. Again, I think the star minutes will go up, and that's the biggest issue. But I don't know if I believe in the concept of 11-man rotation, quick substitutions, play as fast as possible. It might work, but I'm not necessarily a believer in that myself.
It's particularly frustrating when the other team's best players play significantly more minutes than the Grizzlies' best players.
Right.
Like,
let's say I have a back-to-back.
Yeah, just on a super basic level, like anybody can take a look at the box score and see that and go, what the heck? Like, why? This doesn't make any sense. And I totally understand it. I've said this in past seasons, and I know you've probably remembered me saying this. Like, to me, I know they've had problems with the third quarter, so this is a little bit more challenging to fix than maybe it is on the surface level. But like, Ja checking out with 9 minutes to go in the Brooklyn game, down 5, and then coming to the scorers table with under 4 minutes to go, or right around 4 minutes to go, and they're waiting for a stoppage to get him back in, and by the time he comes back in, they're down 11. I want them to redistribute minutes in a different way that allows him to be on the court for the last 7 or 8 minutes of the game.
A lot of people feel that way, and they may be right, and you may be right. I am not hung up on that specifically. To me, it's more about the total minutes. I think, in some games, because he played 28 minutes. So if he plays 34 minutes, but he only comes in for the last 4 of the fourth quarter, the score when he comes in might be a lot different score.
I understand.
And I think when you have a tight game, then it's like, get Ja back in. You have that attitude about it. But over the course of 82, most games aren't tight. This dovetails with my get on my soapbox about the way coaches react to fouls. There's such a focus on...
I was going to say, this is a different version of that.
Yeah, it is. It's the same thing. It's such a focus on you've got to coach for the last 3 minutes. And to me, you got to coach for 48. And on average, now when it goes the other way, it feels way different. I understand. When you watch a game, it feels different. It feels like the last minute is so much more important than the previous 47. But in reality, over the course of 82 games, the least important minute of the basketball game is minute number 48. Because most of the time, it doesn't matter. And the more you scale back, the more important the minutes get in reality in terms of their impact on the final score. So the idea of front-loading Ja in the first quarter and the third quarter, I don't really have a problem with that. To me, it's the total minutes thing that matters.
I will make a counterpoint. And everything you said makes sense. And you're exactly right. It's exactly like the foul conversation.
Right.
Like, all minutes are created equal in a basketball game. I get that. Why I think they need to redistribute is because, one, when Ja's on the court, you always have a chance to make a run, and you're more than 50% of the time his plus minus in a box score is going to be positive. Right. And I think you're more likely to win the minutes when he's on the court. And if you put him in and you're down by 8 or 10 with 7 minutes to go, there's a good chance you can get back in the game. And I understand that may be impacted by the third quarter. The other reason...
But if the total minutes aren't changing, you're just taking time from some other time in the game and shifting it, right?
Yes, you're just shifting it. But other teams are playing their best players down the stretch of the fourth quarter.
All right.
And while Zach LaVine is killing for the Bulls, is killing the Grizzlies' second unit that's on the court from the 10-minute to the 4-minute stretch of the fourth quarter, I would rather have Ja Morant in the game to stop the bleeding and let the second unit of the Grizzlies play more minutes against the second unit of other teams that do it a more traditional way. And I don't have stats in front of me that can prove that the stars of other teams will play the last 7 or 8 minutes of a game, but it feels that way.
I guess my thing is whatever minutes you're planning to give Ja Morant, and some nights maybe that's 28, and some nights it might be 34, right? Whatever your cap on what you think you're going to play Ja Morant is, I want all of those minutes to come when the game is still in question, and not to use 28 of the 34 and be like, we don't need the other 6, because we're the game's over kind of thing. I want to maximize the impact. I feel like that happens all through the game. And oftentimes it does not happen at the end of the game.
All right. A couple questions from the internet. Somebody said, with a deluge of ankle injuries, why don't more basketball players wear high top sneakers? That's a good question. I wonder.
You're the shoe guy. I got no answer to that.
I was always a high top guy. That's an interesting question. Why are the Grizzlies going away from Zach Edey in the second half?
Defense. I think partly it's defense, and partly it's just feel for the game. I don't know. What is your answer to that?
I think it's defense, and I think it's that you have better options right now.
It's sort of trust level, you know?
Yeah. Who do you trust more late in the game at this stage, Brandon Clark or Zach Edey?
Yeah. No, completely.
I think you trust Brandon Clark. Who do you trust more at this stage, Jay Huff or Zach Edey? I think that's not a less clear question, but it's...
If you watched the first quarter last night when like Edey was putting up good numbers, not only was like he not getting rebounds and not defending very well, but like even on offense, like Ja's having to like push him and show him and go here and go there and all of that. I just think, rookies need time. And so I'm not that worked up about that.
I get playing fast to not face a set defense, but it seems a bit out of control at times. Teams will get back in the playoffs no matter how fast you want to run. Is it worth it to try to win in the regular season this way versus working on half-court offense? Seems like it impacts our defense too.
I mean, I don't know. Do you want to go?
I do think that that's a valid question because the game does slow down in the playoffs, and you don't know if the Grizzlies are going to be able to run and gun. But the truth is that while they've played well and they have a pretty good fast break offense statistically, I think it could be a lot better based on how their defense plays. They've been so inconsistent defensively. They're taking the ball out of the net so much. They actually probably don't have as many fast break opportunities as they had hoped, and they're playing more in the half court than they had hoped at this point. But I think it's a valid question. I think it's fair to wonder if that style works in the playoffs.
You want to win games in the regular season too. Transition basketball is more efficient. Bad transition basketball is generally more efficient than good half court basketball. And Ja Morant is your point guard, and he's dynamic in the open floor. So I think they should push the ball and look for opportunities. I don't think they should push it to the point of sloppiness or like be so intent on the whole, you got to get to the 3-point line in 3 seconds. And I'm not as into that. I'm into taking transition opportunities where you can find them. I'm into pushing the ball and getting out in transition. I'm not as into just firing up the first shot you get kind of stuff, So I don't know. It varies with me.
Probably a better question for Chris. Has the fan base always been this dramatic? I don't recall this being the case. Certainly had the miserables that would come out of the bushes, but this seems rather excessive. He is a bit of a Grizzlies, a bit better of a franchise historian than I.
So that's a good question. It's a hard question to answer, even when you can remember the whole of the franchise because recency bias sets in, right? I feel like social media early on I feel like the social media stuff has changed. And I feel like the fan base on social media is more prone to overreaction and meltdown and toxicity and that kind of stuff than in the past. I do think that media writ large is less prone to killing players than in the past. And maybe part of that is my buddy Chris Herrington grew up. And so he used to be the primary, the primary version of that, making up songs about how much he hated Pau Gasol and Rudy Gay and stuff like that. You don't hear that much anymore. There were some other radio people in town that used to really go hard in a kind of a mean way after specific players. I think the credentialed media is less hard on specific players and less, not even critical, but less sort of mean about it than in the past. But I do think the fan base is a little more prone to overreaction now than they were then. That is my read. I may be wrong.
What is the infatuation with Jake LaRavia? He got more fourth quarter minutes than Ja tonight and played more than Jaren versus Chicago.
Jake's plus minus has been one of the better ones on the team actually through 5 games. It
was a rough one against Brooklyn.
He went 1 for 10 or whatever, 1 for 11, something like that.
Yeah, the 2 missed layups late in the game.
I mean, at that point, Bane's out and Smart's out and your options are diminished. So that's part of it. I think Jake LaRavia has been a little bit better than a lot of fans give him credit for. A little bit. I think, because his value is not he has not shot the ball well, and people focus on shooting, especially for a player who's supposed to be a shooter. And I think his value is generally come in other areas. And so I think people equate the shooting with the overall play. It goes the same way with Zach Edey. People want Zach Edey to play down the stretch because he's 6 of 9 in the box score. I think Jake LaRavia's overall play has been a little bit better than his shooting line. But I don't think there's an infatuation with Jake LaRavia. I think like they got 5 guys on the injured list who all play on the wing. I think that's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, somebody's going to have to play.
Somebody's got to play, you know?
They've continued to bet on him, though. I mean, he played in summer league, and it's interesting. I think aren't we supposed to get some clarity tonight by the time this podcast is out on his future?
Well, I mean, in theory, it could be any second now. I think Jake LaRavia. It's Thursday afternoon as we're recording, and the deadline for team options for like rookie contract guys to exercise or not exercise team options for next season is tonight. Most of them have already happened. Like the Lakers declined their option on Jalen Hood-Schifino. The Milwaukee Bucks, who the Grizzlies play tonight, declined their option on Marshawn Beauchamp. Other guys have had their options picked up. As far as I know, I think Jake LaRavia is the last man standing. My sense is that decision may not be made till the deadline. I don't think it's an obvious call because I think he is borderline. I think he has improved to the point that he's a real NBA player, but he's not a real NBA player you just have to have on your team either. So I don't know what they're going to do with that.
Yeah, and with certain guys needing to be paid.
Well, Santi Aldama is going to be a restricted free agent next summer. And so do you want Jake LaRavia on your books for like $5 million or whatever when you're looking at that? I think that's a real question.
Here's a hypothetical you'll love. What does this team look like if it doesn't trade for Marcus Smart and sign Dillon Brooks to the deal that he received from Houston? They'd be a tax team, right?
I don't really have the energy for all the hypothetical. To me, I'll just scale it back and say trade for Marcus Smart or not trade for Marcus Smart. The counterfactual does not necessarily mean signing Dillon Brooks. It could be doing something else, right? And so I think if you could roll it back, you don't trade for Marcus Smart. Now, the reasons they traded for Marcus Smart are partly also locker room stuff, you know? I think they valued that. But the return on the court has not been good to this point at all, and now he's hurt again. And if you go back, you know, you basically traded Tyus Jones and 2 first-round picks, and you could have done other stuff with that, right? I don't think it's keep Tyus Jones. I think it's some other trade. But I think if you go back in time, you do something different.
Yeah, Marcus, the health has been the big thing with him. He just hasn't been able to stay on the court for this team. But the defensive numbers are good still for Marcus Smart. Have you been keeping up with Dillon? Like, what is his impact been? Do you think, in terms of impact of the two players, is there one you'd rather have?
Oh, I think Dillon is better right now, in part because he plays. But I don't think he's had some great run in Houston. I think he's just been Dillon Brooks, you know? I think he's like a middle of the rotation guy for them. He plays good defense and the shooting is erratic. And like, I think Dillon Brooks has been Dillon Brooks, you know?
You were high on Houston coming into the season. How are you feeling now?
Our boy Reed Sheppard talk about Zach Edey. Our boy Reed Sheppard doesn't play. He's not doing anything.
I know. Not much.
Were we wrong about that? Or
I'll tell you who I think I was the most obviously wrong about was the Nuggets.
I was right about that. That's the one thing that was my best call.
We'll see if that has been a mess. And it was funny, like, because, you know, Jay Huff was once on the Nuggets, and I wrote the story about the coaching changes, and one of the guys I interviewed who wrote the book about D3 coaches making it to the NBA, I take it he's a Nuggets fan or knows something about Nuggets. He said, you know, Jay Huff turning into an actual NBA player for the Grizzlies is just the turd sundae that, you know,
right.
the cherry on top for the Nuggets on a terrible start to the season.
So you were also high on the Bucks, who are off to a bad start. I'm just rubbing it in on you. But I bring this up because they're playing the Bucks tonight. I look at their schedule. So the Bucks are 1-3. I don't remember who the third loss was, but you know who the losses have been to? I can remember 2 of them.
I don't remember any of them.
They lost to the Nets and the Bulls. Just like the Grizzlies.
Oh, that's right. I knew that they lost to the Nets. But yeah, the Bulls erased a 20-point deficit again.
Against Orlando.
Wednesday, against Orlando. So the Grizzlies are not alone.
Right.
Yeah. Anything? What other predictions do we make? Sacramento, I guess, they look all right. The Lakers, I said I thought the Lakers would be pretty good. They're off to a good start.
Lakers are off to a good start. I'm trying to remember. I picked Luka to win MVP. He has not played great, but it's early. Tatum looks really good.
The Celtics are
Tatum and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Anthony Davis. I think those are your leading guys at the moment at the start of the season.
Well, I'll be on this next Grizzlies road trip. I'll be in Philly and Brooklyn. Hopefully vibes are up for that trip based on where they are now.
Hopefully Embiid does not make his return this weekend. They're threatening that.
Yeah. I mean, if they're threatening it, usually they don't put that stuff out there unless it's likely to happen.
You might get Embiid 80. Clash of the Titans. You may be in the building for that.
Yeah, Embiid 80. That would be a fun one. It's more Embiid Jaren, but yeah.
Right.
Jaren's had some monster blocks on Embiid in his career. There is some real potential for, two giant humans to clash at the rim in that one. So that'll be cool. And then the Nets, they've got to beat the Nets. They got to beat the Nets.
You can't get swept by the Nets.
You can't get swept by the Nets. Not this season. All right, that'll do it for us this week. Make sure you go check out all the Daily Memphians' other podcasts. But for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.